Hey, OncoPT, and welcome back to this episode of the OncoPT podcast. I am so privileged, y'all, because I managed to get him on his day off. So first of all, thanks, Joe, for that. But I have Joe Sanic back on the OncoPT podcast. It's been 2 years. It is time for a refresh, and I'm so excited that he's going to spend some time today with us, kind of talking about how can we make a better work life experience for ourselves and what that actually looks like in practice, even as physical therapists busy with a ton of patients in this wonderful world of oncology. So Joe, welcome back to the OncoPT podcast.
Oh, I'm so excited to be back.
It's been 2 years. A lot's happened. So for my listeners who are maybe newer and haven't yet heard that interview, would you mind just introducing yourself?
Yeah, so I am Joe Sanok, and I'm a licensed professional counselor and psychologist here in Northern Michigan. I had a counseling private practice until 2019 when I sold it to one of my other therapists, and she now has 3 locations and like quadrupled the revenue and is just killing it, which is really cool to see. And now what I do is I do full-time consulting with people that own private practices. So counselors, therapists, psychologists, PTs, massage therapists. We have a podcast called the Practice of the Practice podcast, and just support people doing really cool, innovative work to build the practices that they absolutely love.
Now, 2 years ago, we first got connected through like a business mastermind kind of experience, but you published a whole book. Oh, like, can we talk about that for a hot minute?
Yeah. Yeah, the book's called Thursday is the New Friday, and it was published by HarperCollins, which was my dream to get published by them. It was sort of like applying for Harvard and just being like, yeah, there's no way I'm getting in. And then you get in and you're like, you surprise yourself as much as anybody else. So yeah, they bought the book, and I wrote it in 2020 during the pandemic, and really only had like 5 months to write this book. But I had a really focused idea of how I was going to structure it. And for me, it just really kind of follows what I teach people all the time. And that's that first we have to know where we're at. So our internal inclinations, like what are we naturally drawn to do and what is a bit of a challenge for us, not having any judgment around that, but just, are you naturally curious, or are you naturally, going to jump on something rather than overthink it, and just understanding where you're at. Then instead of doing the work next, slowing down and looking at the brain research around why slowing down is actually really good for our brains and helps us have breakthroughs we couldn't if we just plugged through. And then the third part is, how do you absolutely kill it? When you're going to work, how do you just kill it and get things done, whether that's with progress notes or clients or meetings or whatever's on your agenda, that you are fired up to go into those areas. And really looking at how the 4-day work week is one solution. And it isn't always just, Monday through Thursday. Lots of different businesses have done different approaches to it. But we examine how the 4-day work week really is that next step in business and human evolution for us to optimize our brains to get more done.
I love that, especially in popular media, kind of, like the news, but also on different social media platforms. I think this idea is much more accepted in the 2 years, even since your book was published and those conversations were really starting. I think people are more in tuned and inclined to this. But one of the things you and I were talking about before we started the call is the how, right? Particularly within healthcare. I think there are other industries that are very well, like they're getting into this, they're leveraging this appropriately, and they're seeing really good results. But I always hear in the back of my head, because I think I hear a listener saying this, how the heck is that going to work in healthcare?
Yeah, it's a valid question. Yeah, I think that in any industry that needs 24/7 care, whether that's ambulances or, whatever, it's going to be a challenge. But I think if we just start with like, what is the problem? We look at doctors, PTs, nurses. My mom's a nurse practitioner. My brother-in-law is an ophthalmologist. My sister's a nurse. Like I've been surrounded by, awkward table conversations since I was born. So it's like, And so, knowing that dynamic, like, do we want doctors that are working 50 or 60 hours, and for you to be on the surgery table with someone who's been working for 60 hours? Like, is that good for health outcomes? Is that good for patient outcomes? Is that good, for liability? I don't know the data on it, but my guess would be that if someone's working 30 to 35 hours a week, that they're probably doing a better job statistically than someone that's working 80 hours a week in regards to how much they accidentally screw up. We've all had experiences, in healthcare in some way, but it's like, I remember I was at a really famous cancer institute that when I was having thyroid cancer, had my thyroid out, all this happened. I'm allergic to codeine and had this bright red codeine bracelet on. And I'm coming out of surgery and this lady's like, here's something for the pain. And I remember this and I was like, just, it doesn't have codeine in it, does it? And she goes, oops, and walks away and comes back with like Tylenol that doesn't have codeine. It's like, there's so many things just in healthcare that is based on humans remembering, humans just like looking at a bracelet, asking for someone's like ID and their date of birth. And do you know why you're here? Like you say that 15 times before you have a surgery, like what's your name, date of birth, and why are you here? And if any of that's off, then rightfully so, they say, well, let's double check things. Now that's fine. But when we look at other worlds like business or marketing and how much is automated, I mean, the fact that I can order almonds and they'll arrive within 2 days from Amazon. And I'll forget that I even ordered almonds, and they've figured out something as petty as almonds to get to my house almost flawlessly. And if they're the wrong almonds, I can just like scan a QR code and not even repackage it and drop it at a UPS store. Right. Like that's just mind blowing. We have those kind of logistics and that those aren't being applied to healthcare. To me, there's a greater systemic problem worth discussing. And one of the symptoms of that is that it's very hard to implement healthy habits within healthcare, which is crazy. Healthy habits in healthcare, they should be leading the charge. So then what do we see is we see these people that are burned out, they're stressed out, probably have a lot of inflammation. We know that inflammation's, very much associated with cancer. So we see the very people that are supposed to be teaching us how to be healthy are often in a system that is unhealthy. And one of those symptoms is that it's hard to implement the 4-day work week. So we can talk through, like, say there was a clinic that wanted to do that, what would that look like, and how do you work with higher ups? And I wrote a whole Harvard Business Review article about how to do that no matter the industry, and we can go through that. But we first just have to say, like, there is some crap in the healthcare world that is unnecessary and could really be changed with just some basic good logistics.
Agreed. 100%. I mean, it's... First of all, I'm so glad that you had the cognizance, like the cognitive awareness after as being a patient yourself to check that. I mean, to do a little more of a, innocuous, very PT example, y'all, I have treated the wrong side of a person multiple times as a professional and as a student. And again, just coming from the more tired you are, the more burned out, the more just exhausted you are, the more errors we make. And while I can look back on that and be like, wow, that was really dumb, I will never do that again because I've made that mistake enough. It's those errors over time that can really add up to make a very negative experience for your patient. Maybe it doesn't take multiple errors. Maybe it takes one to where it is problematic, even catastrophic for that patient. And it matters for us as PTs too.
Absolutely. And I think that that's where there are things that will always have that human element. We want that to be a part of our healthcare. And there's so much that could be automated, could be triggers, could be even just having when someone's laying on the table could make it very clear what's left and right. Having AI be a part of it. It's not very hard to implement a lot of these things.
So then the question is how, right? How do we actually do this? We've established it's a problem. We also know, and I really appreciate, Joe, you having this conversation because you're in healthcare. You understand a lot of the logistical barriers that we face as a system, which is pretty crummy in general.
Yeah. So if we really look at how do we implement the 4-day work week, especially in settings that are, let's just start with settings where it's not just 24/7. It's not an emergency room, something like that. Let's look at a basic PT clinic. That's where most of your audience is working and connected. So we want to start with looking at a smaller team to do a trial. I'm a big fan of experimenting. And so you want to talk to your supervisor if you're a W-2 employee. If you're a contractor, talking to whoever you check in with. If you're a business owner, then you're fully in charge and can just do this on your own without checking in with anyone. So whoever you have to report to, getting that person on board to talk with them about, I'm reading all this about the 4-day work week. I'd like to try this experiment that I heard on this awesome podcast and that I also read this Harvard Business Review article on. Can we try this? And so you don't want to just charge into HR and say, I want to do the 4-day work week and have it be alone. You want to have your bosses back and that they have your back, because someone at some point, it's going to look bad. There's going to be something that falls through the cracks. And really, you want to make sure that your boss is on board with you and that you're on board with them. And that's going to really tell you, are you working for someone that is even open to this? If they're like, what are you talking about? No, we're not going to even talk about that. Okay, you're working for someone that still has an industrialist mindset, which can be helpful, but also isn't always helpful for actually human outcomes. So assuming that person's like, yeah, what are you thinking? Let's talk about this. You want to try to get a team of usually 4 to 6 people that have a similar role. So you don't want the 2 PTs and the HR person and the front desk intake coordinator and your boss on a team. Like that's just going to be too many different roles. You want to try to have it be mostly the same role. So say you have a group of 4 PTs and your supervisor. Awesome. Then you want to look at what are the KPIs that you've already established, you're already judged on. We're not starting from scratch. So that could be number of hours billed. That could be number of sessions done. That could be, occupancy rate. Sometimes it's, we want to have 85% of the time that you're here, that you're actually seeing clients. So really looking at like, what are those things and run some of those numbers to say, is this even possible in 4 days? It may not be possible. It may just be that the KPIs that business has or, that nonprofit has it's just impossible. And so then it's really a matter of, is that healthy? And then how much are we getting reimbursed? Could we do a healthier version? Can we get reimbursed more? Looking at those sorts of things too. Because typically most of the studies show that even when people are working 4-day work weeks, and we're talking 8 hours, not just squeezing 10 into 4, that those people are being paid the same amount and getting the same or better outcomes. And so we're not saying you're going to take a pay cut, ideally. We're not saying any of that. We should be doing like a 4-day work week and getting that full salary. So looking at that and then saying that's the KPI we're already being judged on. And then how are we going to know if we're hitting that or if we're not every single week? Because we're going to, in a second, talk about that weekly quick standing meeting that you're going to have to talk through those KPIs. The second conversation to have with that group is, what are the norms that we are going to have as a group of 4 or 6 that for us can reinforce just the DNA of this experiment. And so, for example, in the corporate world, a lot of times people have this expectation that if your boss emails you at 7 p.m. and your kids are, going to bed, that you reply by 8 p.m. And it's just like, you're kind of on call all the time. And if you're on vacation, you still got to keep up with your email. And, so looking at, well, what's the version of that for PTs? So, is it that we're going to make sure that if, on Thursday, if our last session is at 4 p.m., we really need to get our progress notes in right away. So within an hour before we leave for the weekend, if we're taking Fridays off, like, is that something? Are we going to be, emailing or texting each other after 5 p.m.? And if so, or if not, like, what's that going to look like? So we set some norms, we set the KPIs, the key performance indicators, and then we enact the trial usually for at least 3 months. And so every Monday morning or whatever the first day of the week is for your team, you want to have a quick 15-minute standing meeting. And you need to have that data from someone. So if it's going to be sessions, okay, we need to have the billing person Monday morning at 7 a.m. We need to have that ready for us to pull up on a screen to say, okay, last week we were all at above 85% occupancy. Jane last week was, one step below everyone else and had one fewer client, but she had a sick kid, so that makes sense. Then we say, okay, so overall we're on track, or we're down for the week. What happened? Okay, we had a bunch of no-shows and cancellations on Thursday, and we couldn't squeeze them in on Friday. Like, what are we going to do in these situations to continue having a positive outcome for the 4-day work week? And then we also want to look at the norms. Jim texted everyone at 9 p.m. on Wednesday about the staff thing. None of us can relax when we hear that right before bed. That's not appropriate, Jim. Or maybe we don't fully call him out on it, but just to say do we need to do that? Maybe something big from corporate comes every, first Wednesday of the month, and we do need to get a text or email and respond to it. Okay, we got to change our norms then. So now we do that every single week for a month. At the end of that month, we bring together all of that data, and we do just a quick 1-page report that we can give to that supervisor. Because if that supervisor is not the owner, and even if they are, someone above them is going to say, wait, you approved a 4-day work week. That's not okay. What's going on? And then they can say, look, our data shows that they are meeting and exceeding the KPIs that we already judged them by. This is actually potentially a new thing. And then we want to also be gathering some of that qualitative data. So I got to go to my my sister-in-law's volleyball game on Friday afternoon, or, my kids forgot their lunch and it was great because I could just run by the school and I ended up like being a volunteer reader in their classroom. Like, what are the qualitative things that help you want to stay in that business more because of the 4-day work week? So then we repeat that for 3 months. And at the end of that third month, we bring it all together. We, do some surveys with the team, some assessments. What did we learn from this? We may have learned that people would rather come in for PT on Friday than on Wednesday. And statistically, people no-show on Wednesdays more than other days. So why don't we stop just doing sessions on Wednesday? Then we also would want to look at, if we really had this be across the business, what would it save? So say we didn't pay for lights on Wednesday. Say we didn't have to pay for some of our hourly staff on Wednesday, or maybe we switched them into something else where they're doing social media marketing or other things. What would that save on AC in Texas in the middle of the summer if we just could turn that off for a night? What are the options of how we could save money even beyond this? And then looking at, would the 4-day work week potentially be able to do another round, another 3 months, or do we want to try this as a 6 months, or do we want to expand it to other teams?
I think we see this already in some capacity. Okay, I think it requires a little bit of creative thinking on the part of the clinician, but then also the receptiveness of obviously like some of those decision makers within the team, right? Is that a supervisor? Is that someone above? But on one of my clinical rotations, I was doing 4 10s. Now that's still 40 hours a week, right? But I had that whole day to where I could take time off and do errands and study or whatever I needed to. And then when I was in my clinical job previously, I worked slightly longer during like Monday through Thursday. And then on Friday, I was able to take a half day. And then, even just the mental load of being able to take some of that time during the week and not feel like I was tied to the schedule, again, like 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. I mean, just what a world of difference I know that it made for me as far as mental health, and especially in the post 2020 world. I think mental health is so much more a part of the conversation on, I want to work. I want to call this my calling, right? My occupation, where I'm actually doing good things, but I also want to be able to take care of myself.
Yeah.
And my family.
Well, and that's what a lot of the factors that the direct supervisors don't look at is like, how much paid time off are these people taking? What are our healthcare costs? If all of a sudden we have better health outcomes within this business, you might be able to negotiate better health insurance. You may be able to have other ways that you can save money. It may be, we only used an average of 2 counseling sessions per year, but yet we're offered 20. Can we negotiate something a little bit different there to just have a better deal for our business? So there's lots of things that are not always that top line type of thing of hours worked and, the CPT code or whatever codes, are used in PT that I don't know. Like those are, those are things that often aren't thought of. And that if you can start to look at that bigger picture, that's where, even if it is 4 10s, you can get so much more done, and it then helps it be a better work environment. So like I even think about like today, usually we're recording this on a Monday. So usually I take Mondays and Fridays off. With Monday, I do a little bit of like emailing, but not like a ton of really like work. And I was a couple minutes late here because my tire in my car kept leaking, and I would fill it back up, then it would 4 days later leak. So I finally, because today I had off and it wasn't a Saturday and it wasn't going to be like crazy busy, I took it over to have it looked at, and they were able to patch it. And it was like, I got to do that on a Monday, and I did a couple meetings this morning because tomorrow I have a doctor's appointment, and it's like, I can shuffle things around easier, and I show up better for my kids. I'm not as stressed out as I am a single dad, so I have a lot of stress anyway. And then it's like, I have a business to run. I have my own life things, but I now can be better in all the different domains that I show up because I'm not just always at the brink where one little thing is going to make me just feel so stressed out.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And that's such a good point, Joe, of like, again, the listener, like, I'm talking to you right now. You're not just a physical therapist, right? You're a whole human being beyond that who has interests and hobbies and things that you like to do and be a part of. And we can't do that. Genuinely, like, we cannot do that all and also show up in this historical way of how we've always done healthcare. And we know how that's affecting our patients, right? We know what kind of outcomes we're seeing. We know the challenges that are a part of us, this is absolutely a solution that we can take to actually like do it better. So Joe, I want to come back to something that you mentioned previously, because I know there's probably still some people who are like, okay, I'm on board, I understand, I'm bought in, but still the how. Like, what does that mean for my day? You mentioned previously that off air, the capture, I forget the rest of the system. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think that there's these big picture things of like changing a whole company culture. And sometimes we get overwhelmed by that. And sometimes we just can't change it. But I think one thing lately, it happened in one day. I had 3 different consulting clients bring up the same issue. And it's so fun to do so much consulting with people with their private practices that you notice these trends. And the problem was they were like, I have data everywhere. And it really, like, I have an idea, I'll put it in Trello, I'll put it on a Post-it note, I'll put it in my phone, I'll tell Echo to save this list, I'll add a shopping list. It's like everything is just everywhere. And so the problem was I just have to-do lists everywhere. I have all these ideas, like I have all these goals, but then when it's time to like do anything with them, I'm like, where the heck is all that stuff? And so then they end up like rewriting it or, thinking about it or remembering it. So that's the problem that really came up. And so I came up with this solution that was really enacting what I'm already doing, but hadn't really given it a name. And that's capture, schedule, do. Capture, schedule, do. And the idea is that storing things in our brain and really like just keeping it up there, it takes up brain space. So if you're doing the wrong side of somebody's body, it's probably because you're thinking, oh shoot, like I have a dinner party tonight I have to get spinach for, and I also have this and this. And if you wrote it down, put it in your calendar, captured it somewhere, that wouldn't be just messing up your ability to do PT. So starting with where does it work for you to capture things? And so for me, that's just the note on my phone. So it doesn't have to be some super advanced system. I like systems like Trello, but that's to me more like ongoing long-term planning rather than like I'm in the car driving across town. It's like, oh shoot, I got to remember this. So I'll either throw it into a note or like, if I'm driving, I'll just say, remind me in an hour or two, and I'll just say whatever that thing is. And then I'll put it into that thing at that point if it's an unsafe place that I think I'm going to forget whatever it is. So we first want to capture it somewhere and in the same spot. Then we want to schedule. And there's a few different things we want to schedule. For one, we want to schedule in regularly looking at those notes. We don't want to just capture all of this stuff only to just leave it there. That's useless. It's the same as it just floating around your brain. We want to take time. So it may be that once or twice a week, you just put 15 or 20 minutes into your calendar and just put it on repeat to review those notes. So when we organize that, we want to schedule it in and say, okay, when am I going to work on this? So say I had a new idea for an e-course, and it's like I'm seeing all these private practitioners, and right now, AI is a big thing. So say I had an idea like, oh, I should come up with like five ways to implement AI in your practice that are HIPAA compliant. Okay, that sounds really interesting. So I may look at my calendar and say, wow, like this week's really packed. So is next week. Then I'm going to, go to LA and see Coldplay, which I actually am, and I'm so excited for.
Nice.
But so it looks like early October, or, is going to be when I could really put some time into just planning and thinking through that. I'm going to actually put that in my calendar to just plan AI training. And I may not know what's the next step, but at least it's in there. And now I have that time set aside. And this could be as small as like today, I put in my calendar, put volleyball schedule into your calendar. So my daughter just started volleyball last week. They still didn't have the calendar for like all of their practices and games. Today is Monday, as I said. I got this on Saturday for like, I'm like, seriously, I need to plan. Like, what the heck? So I put in my calendar, go through volleyball schedule. And so, after this, before my next thing, I'm going to go through the whole calendar. And so doing that kind of preventative scheduling and telling yourself where it's a good use of your time, then you actually have to do it. So we had capture, schedule, do. To me, when it gets into my calendar, unless there's a really, really good reason, it's like seeing a client. I have set aside that time for myself to do that item, not to watch YouTube, not to go listen to a podcast and work out, things that may be good for me, but I've set aside time to do that. So then making sure you're actually doing it during that time. And if when you look at your calendar for the coming week, you say, oh my gosh, like I missed this thing, don't just delete that or ignore it. Put it into the calendar somewhere else.
This is a great approach, I think, especially for if you're in a position where you are doing patient education specifically, you're teaching these in services, or you're coming up with this content where you're using to, again, connect with, to network, and to generate that therapeutic alliance with patients in your community, this is a really great approach. Because a lot of times what I see in therapists, Joe, is that, okay, I'll commit to something and I'm like, okay, I know I have this in service I'm going to teach on, et cetera, a day. And then the day before or 2 days before, it's, oh crap, I haven't done that. I need to do it right now, kind of deal. And so I think this approach really solves this. As ideas come into my brain, I can just jot them down and then they're ready for me whenever I actually do commit that time to it. And so I don't lose those ideas, but I also don't wait until the last minute to get the thing done, because I feel like as PTs, we're pretty good at that in a not good way.
Well, and I think that the idea of making sure that, if you have a no-show, like, sure, maybe you need to go for a walk, but maybe you just need to get done the things that in 2 days you had on your calendar to do. Even just looking at, progress notes, with therapists of all sorts, it's like the bane of our existence. But to really look at, why do you take so long doing them? Like, why do you overthink them? Sure, we want to be, compliant with insurance, with liability, with all of that. But we know that work expands to the time given. So if you just set a timer and find your baseline, how long does each progress note per client take you? Is it 15 minutes? Is it 20? Like, what are we working with here? What if we said, cut this in half? Like, what if you said to yourself, okay, like, I usually take an hour to do 6 clients. What if I set a timer where every 6 minutes it goes off and I'm trying my best to just get them done, to get accurate information in there. And if I do that, I'm going to buy myself a milkshake on the way home. I'm going to reward myself. I'm going to whatever. Because to me, that's where some of that operational efficiency then transfers over into just personal efficiency, where we can put time into the things we want to do.
Yep. It really, and this is something that I'm blatantly taking this from Joe's mouth, because he already said this to me. The essence of Thursday is the new Friday really comes down to, how are we managing our time? How are we utilizing our time best to do the things that are important? Like, we know we have to do documentation. We know that we have this paperwork side of work that has to get done. Like, that's just kind of the nature of healthcare, insurance, etc. in the United States right now. But it's, how do we use that time that we have historically allotted to those things? Can we improve that? Can we make it better for both ourselves and our patients?
I think one of the things that I really do is look at, what am I doing over and over, and either retyping or looking for. So for example, we get pitched quite a bit in regards to guests on our podcast. And so frequently it's like, thanks so much for, reaching out. Here's the link to schedule. And I'm like, why am I pulling this every time? And so I've created all these different shortcuts, on my phone and computer, where I can do, it's just guest with 2 G's. So it's GGUEST fills in that entire email. And it's for my email, if I do EE space, it just fills in my email. So how many times do you type your email in a day? It's just finding those little things that it's I do this 50 times a day. What if it took me half the time just because I make a shortcut on my computer? Those are the little things that, if you're doing it over and over, you really should find a way to reduce how much you're doing it.
Yep, 100%. I think documentation templates are a great place for therapists to do this. Even, going back to the in-service comment I made previously, I have the same general presentation I give at least once a quarter that because what I used to do, Joe, is I used to literally write a brand new presentation for every audience that I had, which, again, that is so silly now. Now what I do is I have a skeleton and then I adapt it to the audience that I'm seeing, right? Who are the patients? Who are the practitioners I'm delivering this message to? Same thing with, my different documentation templates of, that's my skeleton, and then I really add on those extra layers specific to the patient. But I'm still not rewriting everything from scratch every time I do an evaluation with a patient, which is what I used to do. AI
and ChatGPT for presentations or any of that stuff has been a total game changer. I mean, you can say, the other day, I had my 5 key points were going to be, and I said, I'm speaking to therapists, counselors, and psychologists. Here are my 5 main points. Can you give me slide by slide what I need for a 35-minute presentation? And it spit it all out, bullet points, make sure to remember to make eye contact, and then that's a starting point. It's a skeleton. It's not going to be what I do, because otherwise people would just go to AI and ask it instead of me. But it's like, I'm going to turn it into my own version of that. And so I think so often people are just like doing this stuff over and over rather than using the new technology that's out there.
Even, like I love AI. I've had a really, really good success using that in my own practice, also in the education work that I do. But even, identifying what are these processes that I've done over and over and over again, high tech, low tech, anything in between. How can you standardize that so that you're saving time over time doing this thing again and again and again? Like, I know there's a therapist right now who is like, I have given the same audio bit on cellulitis for my patients with lymphedema. How can I make, how can I turn that into something more efficient, right? What are those things that you do day in and day out with your clients, with your patients, that you can say, I'm going to make a method or a system for myself, and then I've got it. So the next time that I see that patient or I work with a patient who needs this, I've already got this handy.
Well, and what happens then also is you then have this content that you can give away for free. You can eventually sell. You can build some passive income off of. When you're stressed out and maxed out, it's really hard to think creatively. Whereas, you make time to do a podcast, which isn't initially going to be monetized, but then it's like over time, as you get an audience, it's like, you get sponsors, you can sell e-courses, all the things that come with it. And so I think that that's where it's so important to look at what are you saying regularly and create content out of that. So for your example, it's like, maybe with your clients, first you put together just a really quick, like, hey, I have this just Zoom thing that I made. Let me just email you the link for free. And it's a 45-minute training and it's free. And like, everyone's like, that's so helpful. Oh my gosh. Like, that's a great opportunity to make an e-course, pay a videographer, like a video student from your local community college, pay them $300 to do a half day of video, splice it up, sell it on Teachable, sell it someplace else. And then you can always give it away for free to your clients. And then all those PDFs and checklists and things that you give to clients, turn that into something that you can give to the world, because there's lots of people that are out there that need to have that education and need to have that help implementing things that is outside of maybe the scope of your license in regards to what you would do in physical person-to-person therapy, but it's more on that educational side.
Yep. A big thing, I mean, you really set the stage really perfectly for me to take this, Joe. One of the big things, I just had a conversation with another podcast guest all about prehab. So this concept of how can we prepare our patients physically and even emotionally to an extent for upcoming cancer treatments. And one of the big things that we try to do in this is not always actually intervene, but most of the time it's to educate them on here's what you need to know about cancer treatment side effects and how it can affect your body. I mean, I can turn that, like, yes, it's maybe a little more work on the front end. I already have a sheet of topics and bullet points that I want to cover. I can just put my letterhead on that, and now it's a handout for all of my patients. And it even advertises potentially for me before I even meet that patient. If they're handed that, that flyer or whatever, to then say, you know what, I know where I can go for when I have this problem, if and when I have this problem. Again, just saving time overall that you, like my busy therapist audience, we don't have this time, y'all. And so the more we can just make processes and systems out of this to serve us and our patients better, it only helps everybody in the long run.
Well, and thinking about just that checklist example you gave, such a great use of that. But then even just say, okay, what would happen if I then turned that into a blog post, turned it into a YouTube video, turned it into, like, each one of those points on there is a quick Instagram reel. And then maybe you have something that you sell for 99 cents that's like, something else. And so finding how do we reuse that content when it sticks with people. Like, if nobody's reading it and nobody cares about it, don't put all that time in. But if you have a bunch of patients that love this thing, other people in the world will also. And like, that could be the thing that really puts you on the map for some people. And I think that's important because, like, sometimes we think, oh, we're in the information age. We have more than enough information out there. Like, everything is saturated and people are overwhelmed with it. I would, if I had cancer again, I would be very careful as to which authorities I listened to, because there's the randos at home that they think that if I do something crazy, like that's going to help. And, maybe that does work. Maybe there's science behind it. And then there's people that are like so Western medicine that it's like, this is the true and only path. Also, like, if I found someone that I felt like had good science and I resonated with and matched my personality style, that's where it's the implementation age, where, I'm going to follow that person because I don't have to worry about them preaching things that are way outside of what I believe and what I value. And so that's where I think we need more and more licensed professionals out there being influencers, because there's so many self-proclaimed influencers out there that it's just, honestly, it's kind of ridiculous.
100% agree. 100% agree. And again, I hear you, listener. I think a natural inclination, because I hear this a lot from my students, Joe, is like, how in the world am I supposed to do that on top of everything else? This is what we're talking about, right? Like, we're not talking about adding on a whole extra day of work to your schedule. In fact, we're talking about how can we maybe take away some work. And how we do this is by being smarter with the time that we have, doing processes and setting up processes that are going to help us more intentionally show up for our patients each time, every time. Because I know as I was wrapping up my time in my previous position, it was 2020. I was already burnt out and frustrated even before COVID happened. And so then COVID comes on top and just, it amplified all of the cracks and the frustrations I had to the nth degree, right? And so being in that situation of, I know I wasn't showing up for my patients. I know that I was not providing the appropriate level of care, again, both physically as their physical therapist, but also as that person who they needed in front of them. And that is something that now, having removed myself out of that and restructuring how I treat patients, even just my work day, it's made such a difference. And I feel like I'm seeing the same results that I would over a longer period of time, condensed. I can show up and treat my patients much better intentionally the first time and catch and treat those issues in a timely fashion instead of having to wait these, 8+ weeks to see results.
Yeah. I think for people that are listening, they're like, they have a niche area that they want to explore. Really, as professionals that went through grad school and all of that, we think we have to have the end product or the whole system figured out. Your audience will tell you what they want. And to me, I'm a big believer in building your audience before you build the product. Because, like, what if you build a product that's like this 6-month e-course and people really, they just want to be able to call in and do a Q&A, who knows, maybe you're building something that people don't want. Then you're squeezing people into something rather than listening to them. And so to me, starting somewhere with content, and really first step being building an email course that gives them some sort of transformation and value. Then from there, you have somewhere to point people. And we can dig into that sometime or now if you want to, but it's like, to me, that audience building is just such an important thing if you want to step outside of kind of the traditional path in some way.
Okay, I really like that. Let's spend some time with that, because I think, again, just thinking back to my own experience, it's very much every place that I've worked previously has been, we have an idea of how we want to solve your problem, and then we fit patients into that quote solution. Whereas it really needs to be the other way around, of we have a client, we have a patient, and then we fit the solution to them, because every patient is different. We know this. Every patient has unique circumstances. So how can we actually make that happen in typical healthcare physical therapy?
Yeah. So I think one thing is, like, say we were looking at the typical physical therapy, picking one solution that is niched in. And so, are you seeing that a bunch of hockey players are having their hip flexors, are screwed up, like something like that, where it's just like, yeah, we get, 10 to 20 of these clients every single year. What would we want them to know? And to just sketch out, okay, what are the top 9 solutions? It could be 9 exercises, could be 9, whatever. I picked 9 because it's nice to have a weekly email that goes, in kind of chunks of 3. And so it could be, the first 3 are like mindset types of thing. The middle 3 are more like health things, and the last 3 are more exercises. The saying, by the end of this 9-week email course, you'll hopefully have this transformation where you understand these things and you're doing these exercises, and we have some videos that go along with it. And then to say like, okay, yeah, if I had this hockey player in this situation and they were at home doing these exercises, like what would their results be? I went through, 10 sessions of physical therapy throughout this past quarter. Mm-hmm. The amount of like photocopies that had been photocopied, I could barely see the person in these pictures. And it's like, I just wanted to pull up my phone and video them showing me this thing. Like seriously, in one afternoon with a selfie stick with a tripod and a phone, you could demonstrate all of these exercises and then just have them be part of an email course and be like, yep. Next week's email, you can ignore exercise number 2, but 1 and 3, I want you to do. Okay. Like mm-hmm. that's a huge value add. And then once you learn that sort of thing within a company, assuming that company doesn't have any intellectual property types of things, you could expand that outside of the company mm-hmm. in your own business. And of course, you want to make sure you have those conversations. Mm-hmm. If people are paying you to make content within a business, you don't want to then use it for your own thing if that's not cool.
Right.
So you want to make sure you have those kind of conversations because these things that we do over and over are things that our clients want. Like how much would I have loved if there was, a free e-course on Teachable around, for me, it was the hip flexor, like for those exercises. Mm-hmm. And they said, okay, here's a card. I want you to just watch these 6 lessons. Here you go. And then it's like high quality video. I now also have a better perceived value of what I'm getting for my $75 plus what my insurance pays per session. Like, because mm-hmm. I'm getting something to do outside of this, not just a ugly old like photocopy.
Right. And again, I think it almost this model that we're talking about, right, where, of course you're going in and you're seeing your physical therapist, but then you have these like support resources. For me, that feels very much like, wow, look at the time and this extra attention that I'm getting. Even though it may not be my therapist one-on-one who's talking with me, I have these additional ways that I can learn this information and then even start to put, maybe, that I see how this is connecting here. Or, you know what? That makes me think of another question I'm going to ask my therapist the next time I see him because now I'm more invested. Because again, that therapist, in theory, has shown me they're invested in me, not just during that time, but also in the other things that they are helping me, get access to.
Yeah. When I had my counseling practice, I brought together probably 15 blog posts. So they were mm-hmm. all on parenting. And the name of my practice was Mental Wellness Counseling. And so I named the book Mental Wellness Parenting. And on Amazon, it was just like a print as you go kind of thing. I could print them for less than $2 each for this full book. I would order 10 at a time. And in the intake session, I'd be like, here, actually, you can skip chapters 1 and 2. You guys are doing great with that. But I want you guys together to read chapter 3 before our next session. And then we'll talk about that approach to parenting. And they would look at it and be like, oh, this is great. I've never received a book in counseling. And it was stuff that I, as a therapist, would have done anyway. I would have given them a handout. But then it's now I got a free book out of this. And almost every time they'd look at it and be like, whose book is it? And they're like, this is your book? It was like the best business card out there. Where then it's like this $2 investment to have it printed on demand. Mm-hmm. And then like if I spoke somewhere, they would say, and this was before I had a traditionally published book, I'd be like, as part of it, I need you to buy, a copy of my book for everybody. And so, or I say, I'm going to give you a discount where instead of for, $15, you guys can get it for $5. And it's like, it only cost me $2 a book. And now it looks like, everyone gets my book. They get my giant business card and maybe they follow up with me. And so those little things that we can do, whether we're an employee or running our own business, that really make you stand out are the things that are going to help you level up your career and do more of what you love.
I'm thinking of, so I'm looking over at my bookshelf just off camera right now. And there's a physical therapist, Aaron LeBauer, who does that exact thing where he has a book that, I'm sure is printed on demand whenever people order it. But it's such a great way because I know not only do I have a copy of that book, but I've also handed that copy off to other people. And what a better business card for the value that you are providing to that person. And then every other person who encounters that book to say, wow, the next time I need help with blah, 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 I know exactly where to go because I have an expert. I mean, because we know, Joe, you're an expert. You have a book written by you. That credibility that comes along with that is so so important, especially when we're trying to get more professionals into this influencer space, not just, your great aunt Shirley who believes that coffee from the moon is going to cure cancer, et cetera, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think that we often also underestimate how valuable our skill set is, and we limit it just to the typical clinical setting. Statistically, 8% of the U.S. has a master's degree, meaning that whether you have a master's or doctorate, that in any group of 100 regular Americans, there's only 8 people that have a master's degree. So one's going to be someone like me with a counseling degree. Maybe one's going to be someone like you, or a lot of people have doctorates too that are PTs.
Right.
Right. And we'll have an attorney. We'll probably have an accountant that's, master's level. So in any room of 100 people, in almost every situation, you are going to be the smartest just by graduating, like purely your education level. And then we add that you also have specialized in a number of areas. And then we also add your own personal history. And I'm sure that if we just dug into your personal history and my personal history just in life, we probably have some really unique things that have happened to us that influence the lens we see the world in. And so then you become more and more rare through all of those things. And then that kind of imposter syndrome should just go out the window. It's not always easy, but it should.
Yeah. Joe, you've provided such immense wisdom and resources already in this podcast. For the listener who wants to continue this learning journey with you, where can they connect with you, find you on the Great Wide Web?
Yeah. So the best place is our website, practiceofthepractice.com. The podcast is the exact same name. We went a few different directions, so I'm going to just kind of give a little choose your own adventure for people too. So we have Audience Building Academy, which is specifically for people that are highly trained that want to become those influencer types. So if you want to be a podcaster, if you want to be a speaker, if you want to get a traditional book deal, it's a small group of 6 to 8 people that I lead. We meet twice a month, and we have a cohort coming up. So audiencebuilding.academy is where they can read more about that. And that's going to actually, at the time of this recording, it should be open at the time of the release. That community will be open to start next month. Nice. If you're looking at doing podcasting, we have podcastlaunchschool.com. We have a full team that does sound engineering, show notes, social media, design, IT and web support, all of that to help you. And you can read about that at podcastlaunchschool.com. And then if you're just starting a practice and want our free checklists, we have checklists and videos and trainings that are totally free over at pillarsofpractice.com. And that's the best spot there. So a lot of resources there. I know they say you should have one call to action, but we went a lot of different directions today. So I wanted to make sure that
we did.
People have some resources.
Right. And, I do like the build your own adventure because who knows what we've unlocked and inspired today. So any number of these things would be super appropriate. Anything that you would like to leave my audience with before we close out today, Joe?
I would say that we tend to underestimate really the impact that we can do on the world. We follow the script we've been given by our parents, by our schools, by the people we happen to have worked with. And that's great. Usually, that's great. But I do think that challenging those scripts and really asking yourself, is this the life direction that I want to go in for the next 20, 30, 40 years? Or do I want to just test something out? Similar to the 4-day work week, you don't have to fully commit to leaving your job just because you started a podcast. I had a podcast for years before I ever left my full-time job. It was a side gig for a while that was barely, covering the costs of doing it. There's so many ways to test out whether or not there's other things that you could have in your life that bring in different types of money, different types of joy, different types of things. So I want to just challenge you to think differently about how you're making your career. There's never been a time in history when we could really create our own career more than we can now. So I would say that. And then the other thing I would hope people would leave with is that you're more than your job. You're more than your occupation. That's a way you impact the world, but don't get lost in that role and have your ego too tied up in it. There's a billion other things that are amazing about you, and don't let that disappear just because you're working.
Joe, this was amazing. As usual, this was a great interview that I'm super excited to release to my audience. Again, I feel so much more passion, even from when I was burned out and I was in the throes of this. I know what it's like to go from being absolutely miserable at a job and then now actually really liking and loving the work that I'm doing. again, it's out there. It's possible. It takes some creativity and it takes some work, but it's really, really worth it. And so I would really encourage you, follow, connect with Joe on all of the platforms that he mentioned. I will, of course, link to those in today's show notes. And yeah, Joe, thank you so much. This was awesome.
This was amazing. Thank you so much for having me.